Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Star Wars video. This is going to be my review / discussion for Star Wars The Clone Wars Season 2. So people seem to like my discussion on Season 1, so I'll go ahead and continue to do this for the rest of the season as we build up to Season 7's launch on Disney+. So, we're here to discuss Season 2, of course, and this one is given the sort of subtitle, Rise of the Bounty Hunters, because we get a few bounty hunter-centric arcs. And this is definitely the season where we begin to see the switch into the show being a lot more arc-focused. Season 1 has a nice mix of a lot of one-off episodes, but then a couple of arcs. This one, there's not as many one-off episodes, and we shift to having much more arcs. But let's get into it here. So we start off with a 3-episode arc, Holocron Heist, Cargo of Doom, and Children of the Force. So this is the kind of basically follow-up to the last episode of last season of just Cad Bane once again getting to showcase his skills. This time by stealing a holocron from the Jedi Temple with that has the information, the location of Force-sensitive younglings in the galaxy. And the idea that he's going to be capturing these kids for, Palpatine, the Emperor, of course, and the Jedi have to do everything they can to get them back. It really gets across how incredible, I suppose, Cad Bane is as a planner, as a fighter in general, that he's willing to take on such a dangerous mission to infiltrate the Jedi Temple. Of course, he gets some help here from the shapeshifter, bounty hunter, and so on. And there's some nice action as we sort of go through this, which is pretty well done. And it leads, of course, up to the mission. Like, everyone goes their separate ways to try and get the different younglings back. And we even go to, I think, Mustafar at one point in this. And I think there's just a really good atmosphere to this episode, because it is ultimately a plot that Palpatine is putting into action. So there's always that intrigue to it. So yeah, strong start to the season, getting across that bounty hunter idea. Next we move into episode 4, which is called Senate Spy, and this is in a way the first real political focus episode, where it's really Padme is the focus, and it's what she is doing as a character, as a senator, what she is trying to accomplish, and sort of how she gets, I suppose, used by the series and the different characters. And in this time they of course need to get this information, because this episode kind of links into the arc that follows this, the Geonosis arc, in that the information that Padme gets here allows the attack to happen in the next episode. So there's some nice connective kind of tissue, even if maybe you wouldn't necessarily consider this to be part of the Geonosis arc necessarily. But you play into the idea of that Padme has this previous connection to another senator called Clovis, and you play up a lot of these dynamics of the romance between Padme and Anakin, the potential former romance between Padme and Clovis, and her needing to do everything that she can to get this information, and Anakin being there to sort of support Padme, but obviously he gets very frustrated and jealous in a way of the situation. And this is something we come back to a few times, Clovis, Anakin, Padme, this dynamic, and they're always pretty good episodes because there's just really good character stuff in here, and I think that's very good to see. Then we get into a 4-episode arc, the Geonosis arc, the return there, using the information from the previous episode to launch the attack on the droid factory. The first episode, landing at Point Rain, is really, really incredible. Some of the best, big action we see in the Clone Wars. Obi-Wan, Anakin, Ahsoka, Ki-Adi-Mundi. There's a lot of characters, important characters involved here. Some very fun stuff, and that this is our Ki-Adi-Mundi focus episode of the Clone Wars full stop, and he gets a nice chance to shine here, so that's pretty cool. Obi-Wan gets injured, and so as we go into episode 6, he sort of tags out with Luminara, and so Luminara and Barriss come in, and we get Ahsoka and Barriss trying to take out the weapons factory and destroy these super tanks. And the main dynamic in this episode that I like is that you do play up the contrast between how Anakin and Luminara are as masters, and how they sort of use / have confidence in their Padawans. In that, ultimately they're both very confident in their Padawans, but they have different views in terms of like the danger that they're putting their Padawans in. Anakin always likes to sort of lead from the front, that like if he's putting someone at risk, he's right there in just as much risk. So he really struggles with the idea that he has to just let Ahsoka do this on her own, even though he knows that she's capable. Whereas like Luminara just has complete faith in Barriss because she's done the preparation. And the dynamic they get into with these two is basically just that contrast between how they've been trained. Barriss has been trained to do all the prep work beforehand and doesn't really know how to act on the fly when something doesn't go perfect. Whereas Ahsoka has the other approach. So she doesn't plan too much stuff going in, but can immediately act on the fly and make very good decisions. So they actually end up making a really good duo, and they destroy what they need to do, but they also get caught in the blast themselves. And the big moment that people remember from this episode is the approach that Anakin and Luminara take to having potentially lost their Padawan. And Anakin, of course, does everything. He immediately wants to get back, rooting around in the rubble, getting them out. Whereas Luminara is borderline ready to let Barriss go straight away, like not even a try to get them out. Now, of course, they end up being okay, and Anakin's like faith is rewarded, but it's trying to get across that idea of Anakin's attachment issues coming up again. But it more so gets across the idea that like, yeah, this is kind of a little bit of a turning point for Luminara, of just like, she sort of represents those kind of those points about the Jedi that you don't like as much. That they all ultimately have that approach of not really having attachments, but she emphasizes this to a kind of bigger degree than probably should be necessary. And then the final two episodes, Legacy of Terror and Brain Invaders in this arc, just kind of switch up the arc. We go from just being big action to being more of a horror-focused arc, as we're like in these dark caves. We've got these mind control worms, and we sort of find out like, oh, this is why after initially taking Geonosis, it kind of everything fell. That it helps to just explain everything, like why we have to retake this place. And then especially the last episode with the worm invasion on the ship, it's just really good character type stuff. It's your kind of Blue Shadow Virus style episode of season 2, and I think it really works because by the end of this, like, Barriss and Ahsoka really have this strong connection as friends, which helps to set up some stuff like later on. Next up, solo episode, Grievous Intrigue, and we get Eeth Koth here introduced. We get to see his kind of focus episode as he's captured by Grievous, but he gets a message across to how to rescue him, and we see Adi Gallia and Anakin try to rescue him, while Obi-Wan sort of lures Grievous in, and they have a fight. It continues the Obi-Wan Grievous rivalry to set up all the Revenge of the Sith stuff, while also keeping Anakin in action, but keeping the continuity of like Anakin can never confront Grievous one-on-one because he never sees Grievous in person, is like the idea. That it's a restriction on the series, but like they do a good job at sort of avoiding it. And this is just a very solid episode. You think this is kind of going to be your like Nadar Veb, Layer of Grievous style episode, but they do manage to save Master Koth here. Then we get The Deserter, which I think is another very, very strong episode here, just with the idea of, a clone who just decides to have a life of his own, like separated from everyone else. And given this opportunity, he takes it and just settles down. And kind of shows Rex, who gets injured in this episode, that there is life outside of the army. And is one of the key episodes in terms of the setup as we transition from Clone Wars into Rebels, and in that Rex is in both shows. And it's episodes like this, it's what we take away from the big like Order 66 arc at the end of during season 6. Those are key moments for Rex, and that kind of show that like, he's loyal to the Republic, he'll do everything he can to win the war, but that he begins to get that perspective of like, he's not a deserter, he has a family of his own and is doing everything to protect them. And it's a cool episode with just the threat of like the commando droids drop in and they just attack the house, and there's not a ton of people involved, but it's a really intense battle. So really well done there. Next, we have episode 11, Lightsaber Lost, which I think most people cite as being one of the best solo episodes of the Clone Wars. It's just a one-off episode. Ahsoka's lightsaber gets stolen by a pickpocket, and she has to get the help of a very unique Jedi Master, Tera Sinube, an older master, kind of on the Yoda style of things, to track down the thief. The idea being that he's sort of an expert in the criminal underworld, and he takes a very slow and steady approach where she wants to jump straight into action. And so it's this real contrast of Ahsoka just going ahead without thinking, but Tera Sinube, despite being very slow and old, getting things done just as quickly as Ahsoka is by just thinking it through that little bit more. And I think it's just a great contrast. She learns a lesson over the course of this episode about, one, keep an eye on your lightsaber, but also just the overall lesson of like, calm down, monitor the situation, keep your eyes open, like watch for the details and do it that way. And then you think Tera Sinube doesn't have much action in him, but he ends up just immediately coming in, lightsaber comes out, couple of quick moves, he has the lightsaber back. Just very, very impressive showcase here in this episode. So very strong one there. Then we get into a 3-episode arc, the first of our Mandalore arcs of the series. Like, rewatching the series, I forgot how early this was introduced, because like we get very heavy Mandalore focus in the later seasons, but we do get introduced to it fairly early on with the Mandalore plot, Voyage of Temptation, and the Duchess of Mandalore. So the focus here is on basically Obi-Wan going to Mandalore because Duchess Satine, who he has a prior like relationship with, basically is being targeted by the terrorist organization known as Death Watch. And this is why some of this Clone Wars stuff is so important. If you've been watching The Mandalorian, the arcs here and in like season 4 and 5 and going into season 7 as well, you will learn a lot about Mandalorian stuff here, because Jin, the Mandalorian himself, is saved by the Death Watch, and so we're introduced to them here with Pre Vizsla. This is also where we're introduced to the Darksaber for the very first time. Its debut happens within this arc, and it's just really, really cool to see the sort of the Obi-Wan of episode 2 come back, the investigator going on his own, kind of highlighting that like he has this history from his time with Qui-Gon, and so that's how he knows the Duchess, and has that prior relationship that was pretty much borderline romantic, and it becomes a very important thing for Obi-Wan as you go through. So very strong episode to just give Obi-Wan something, and especially in like episode 2 and 3, as like Anakin is included as well, you see him see Obi-Wan's dynamic with Duchess Satine, and he's kind of like, oh, like you had this relationship, like why didn't you go for it? But Anakin gets to see Obi-Wan kind of stick to his guns, that like, no, I was part of the Jedi Order. It was a pledge I was not going to break. And it's this real contrast between Anakin, who we know has already kind of broken that because he's married, and Obi-Wan, who really, you know, is the quintessential Jedi, the perfect Jedi in so many ways. So there's some really good stuff in this overall, the differences in the episodes as we go through. So yeah, pretty good stuff for sure. Then we move into episode 15, which is Senate Murders, and like this is one of those really, this is an awkward episode in that like this like takes place between a bunch of season 3 episodes, and like it actually should take place much later on than it's introduced here. But it's another you know, politics focused episode focusing on the senators. But I think it's actually quite good. Like Anaconda Farr is in it again, of course. We met him in the first season. Padme, Bail Organa gets to be the focus. And just this idea that there are these sort of machinations going on between the senators, and that there's all this sort of mystery and intrigue going on, and that there's a whole arc that, like, while we focus on the Jedi and their battles with the Sith and the Republic versus the Separatists, there is this sort of battle going on the Senate floor as well about, debating all of these topics about the war, and that's the battlefield that Padme fights on a lot of the time. So I always like those episodes because I think Clone Wars really helps to get across like the importance in a way of Padme, because you see very clearly this, and this are the things that she does over the course of these seasons. Next up is episode 16, another one of these sort of random episodes, in that this is actually a prequel to The Hidden Enemy, which from the first season, which is a prequel to the Clone Wars movie, and it's like, okay, yeah, this is confusing, but it's fine. It's a solo episode, and this is the one with the stealth ship, and so on. Pretty good stuff. Like the enemy general in this episode is pretty interesting, and it's just a nice kind of ship to ship battle episode with some tactics involved. Pretty nice overall, but not too much to say about it. Then we get the one-off episode Bounty Hunters, of course, another bounty hunter centric episode. But this is a pretty nice one. Like, we saw an episode of The Mandalorian that was very similar to this one. So Anakin, Ahsoka, Obi-Wan, Felucia. We get the bounty hunters, including like we have Hondo in this episode. We have like what are the names? Like we get Sugi. Oh god, what's his name? Enmo. I keep forgetting his name, but the guy with the really cool hat that like he just throws it around is like one of Dave Filoni's favorite characters. And the idea here is that they help the local farmers, they train them, and it's a big reference to like Kurosawa and stuff like that. So pretty solid episode. Like, we get to see these bounty hunters come back a few times as sort of the more noble bounty hunters in a way, but yeah, we'll talk about them in later seasons. Next up, 2-episode arc, the Zillo Beast arc, with the Zillo Beast and then the Zillo Beast Strikes Back. And this is a very interesting arc because there's a huge takeaway at the end of it that Palpatine wants the Zillo Beast cloned. And as far as I'm aware, the only other ever mention of like Zillo Beast in like canon is that there's a comic that gets across the idea that I think Kylo Ren kills a Zillo Beast at some point, but like it always felt like this is this massive plot point that's going to come up at some point, but it really doesn't. But there's some interesting stuff in here of just the idea of like this is sort of the last of its kind, and they need to get the fuel supplies, and this is sort of getting in the way, and you really see sort of Palpatine, like you see sort of the chaos he causes when he kind of makes some of these decisions. It's pretty interesting. And it's just, obviously it's a Godzilla sort of themed episode, and that's definitely gotten across pretty well. And there's a real sort of kind of tragic aspect to it, with the idea of like that they have to use the gas to kill it in the end, and you really do kind of feel for the Zillo Beast, and that it was just sort of protecting itself. And then we get the sort of finale arc here with Death Trap, R2 Come Home, and Lethal Trackdown. This is the Boba Fett arc, him trying to get his revenge. Some very cool stuff here. I really like the sort of reintroduction of Boba Fett in the first episode of this arc, getting across that he's a clone as well, so he has the same potential skill level as everyone else, but because he's an unaltered clone, he has sort of the time to train all the more, because he can have that slower development. And even still pretty young here, he is incredibly skilled, as we see, and impresses everyone on board the ship. And of course he's trying to kill Mace Windu for what happened to Jango. So really great callbacks in all of this. So we get like Anakin and Mace Windu paired up, which is a interesting combination, because of course this is one of the biggest like lacking in trust dynamics in like Anakin's like life, basically. With the idea here is that like this is the episode where like Anakin shows his faith in R2, Mace doesn't, and it ends up actually being the case that R2 comes and basically helps them out. And there's some very kind of cool stuff in all of this. It comes to an end, like Plo Koon and Ahsoka come back into it. Aura Singh is introduced as sort of like a mother figure almost for Boba. and she's very, very interesting. The voice actress does a really good job at her character. So yeah, very, very strong stuff here overall. And it's unfortunate that they never got a chance to like finish like Boba's arc and really come back to him that much. But they do some interesting stuff with him, which is at least somewhat interesting. But definitely, there's stuff that isn't fully completed in all of this. So yeah, they're the episodes of season 2, and what I'd say about it is just that, like, I don't think it's the best season, but it is very, very solid throughout. There's not really many weak episodes in this season, like, at all. I suppose a lot of people might highlight the 2 Senate episodes as being on the weaker side of things, but I actually think they're quite good, given that it is that type of episode, and then you have the really great battles in Landing at Point Rain, Weapons Factory. The Mandalore arc definitely has its moments, but maybe these first 3 episodes don't show the full potential of that stuff until much later on. And then, maybe the bounty hunter focus isn't the most interesting aspect of Star Wars overall, but there's still some good stuff. I like the return of Boba Fett, the use of Cad Bane some more. That all works for me. And then you do have unique episodes like Lightsaber Lost. The Zillo Beast arc is, to me, quite interesting. It just doesn't quite have the absolute huge arcs that are as good as that other seasons have more of. In that, I believe when I did my list, my top 10, the only season 2 episodes I highlighted was the Geonosis arc. Everything else is just good but not amazing. So it is going to be interesting. Obviously moving on to season 3, which is probably the most all over the place season, but it's also the season that has some of the absolute best stuff in the series. But we'll discuss the odd nature of the first half of season 3 in the next video. But in the comments, let me know what your thoughts are on season 2 of the Clone Wars and what I had to say about it. But that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.